G'day. This video is going to be similar to the channel's last video, except this time we're looking at the Japanese 350cc bikes from the 1960s. Undoubtedly, one of the best Japanese mid-capacity motorcycles from the 1960s could well be a bike that some of you may not even be familiar with. The Bridgestone 350 GTR. Yes, the Bridgestone Tyre Company had a motorcycle division which used to manufacture motorcycles, and they were bloody good ones as well. Why they stopped producing motorcycles is a debatable subject, so I'm not even going to get into that. The Bridgestone's engine was a 345cc oil-injected two-stroke parallel twin. Just finding out the correct amount of horsepower for its engine proved to be a difficult task in itself. The most commonly stated figure was 37 horsepower, whereas Bridgestone itself claimed 40 horsepower. I had to spend a fair amount of time doing some digging to find out the GTR's actual true amount of power that its engine produced. It produced exactly 39.16 horsepower. Top speed was 97 miles per hour, and it would cover the quarter mile in 15 seconds flat. The bike weighed 355 pounds, and it had a 6-speed gearbox. The 350 GTR has many notable features that other bikes of the era didn't have, and indeed it was one of the most sophisticated bikes of its day. I'll let you be the judge which of these features are good and which were not so good. Its engine featured rotary disc valve induction. I believe at the time the only other brand using this technology was Kawasaki. The rotary valve induction system is more efficient because the timing can be better optimised, and it helps to prevent the reverse flow back into the intake port during the compression stroke. Its 6-speed gearbox had neutral at the top instead of between first and second, meaning the lever was pressed down to engage each higher gear. The gear lever and the rear brake pedal could be swapped over to the opposite sides, giving the bike a right-hand side gear change. The Speedo featured a light indicating when fifth gear was engaged. While this may seem a little odd, if you consider that, like most bikes with a 6-speed gearbox, the extra 6th gear really isn't needed until you get out on the highways, having a light illuminated showing when you're in 5th gear, you would know that you still have another gear, both higher and lower. Anyway, it makes sense to me. The GTR also had a racing style dry clutch, and since its kickstarter does not operate through the clutch, this meant its engine could be started while still in gear, simply by holding the clutch lever in, allowing for very quick starting of the engine. It featured a sight glass for both the oil level on its gearbox as well as its 2-stroke oil tank, which I believe was also a first. And its tail light was incorporated into the rear of the seat, which gave the bike a very sporty look. This feature was later copied by many other manufacturers. Suzuki didn't produce their first 350 until 1969, the T350. But even though its engine was also an oil-injected 2-stroke parallel twin, its capacity is the smallest of every bike on this list, at just 315ccs. The Suzuki used the simpler and more traditional piston port induction system. During the 1960s, Suzuki put a lot of effort, testing and research into their 2-stroke engines, and the engine in their first 350 was no exception. It produced 39 horsepower, and combined with its very light weight, which was less than 330 pounds, this gave the bike a top speed of 104 miles per hour and a quarter mile time of 14.53 seconds. Its 6-speed gearbox had a left side gear change, with the now standard gearbox change pattern of 1 down and 5 up, with neutral between first and second. I've got to tell you a bit of a story here. In Australia from 1970, we had a motorcycle endurance race for standard production bikes. It was called the Castrol 6 Hour, The only modifications allowed were to the handlebars, the tyres and the brake pads. The race featured 3 classes of bikes: 250cc, 500cc and unlimited. The track was a tight 1.9 kilometre circuit, which suited the Suzuki T350's huge amount of cornering clearance. It performed so well that it won the race outright, in front of much larger capacity bikes, such as CB750s and H2 Kawasaki's. True fact. Obviously the rider's skill played a big part. His name was Joe Eastmuir. The bike was later disqualified after its victory for not having its horn fitted, and they reckon it had modified pistons. There were many arguments and a lot of controversy regarding this, but it didn't really matter anyway, as the little 315cc Suzuki had already proved its worth. Kawasaki's A7 Avenger laid the foundation for their later two-stroke triples, which made the Kawasaki brand famous during the 1970s. Its 338cc oil-injected two-stroke parallel twin produced 40 horsepower. Like the Bridgestone, it used rotary valve induction. It was the last Kawasaki road bike to use rotary valves, as they reverted back to piston port induction for the H1 triple. The Avenger was very quick for its day, especially for a 350, easily as quick as most of the larger capacity 4-stroke bikes of the same era. But it was a 2-stroke, so this comes as no surprise. Its top speed was 98 miles per hour, and it covered the quarter mile in 14.5 seconds. Although Kawasaki, like all the other companies during this era, claimed much better. I'm not calling them liars, but some of the ridiculous top speed and quarter mile times claimed at the time must have been either with a very small rider on board or a very strong tailwind. Its gearbox was a 5-speed with neutral at the very bottom, and the gears all up, in total reverse compared to the Bridgestone. This is a reason why back in the old days, when you was going to ride someone else's bike, the very first thing you had to ask them was, "What are the gears?" The Avenger's long and flat seat could comfortably carry 2 people. Its handling was reported as being quite good, but in reality we all know that almost all bikes from this era basically handled like crap, and the tyres at the time certainly didn't inspire much confidence either. I'm not being negative, it's just the way it was half a century ago. Another middleweight Japanese bike from the 60s was Yamaha's YR1. It too was a 350. The first in a very long line of Yamaha 2-stroke middleweights that followed. These being the YR2 in 1968, the YR3 1969, the R5 1970, etc., etc. With every new model obviously having improvements and upgrades. The YR1 was released in 1967, and like all the previous bikes, its engine too had an oil-injected 2-stroke parallel twin of 348 cc's. Yamaha used a simpler, more standard piston port induction system. Their bike produced 36 horsepower. Actual top speed of this bike was a tad over the tonne, with a quarter mile time of 14.7 seconds. The Yamaha had a 5-speed gearbox with its gear change on the left, but like the Bridgestone, there was also a provision made to change it to a right-hand gear change with the brake on the left. It featured the now standard gearbox change pattern of 1 down and 4 up, with neutral between first and second. Apparently, the YR1 handled very poorly and vibrated very badly, something which Yamaha addressed on later models. They just kept on making them better and better. Similar to the channel's previous video on 1970s 400cc motorcycles, the Honda CB350 is worlds apart from every other bike on this list. Its engine was a 325cc single overhead cam 4-stroke parallel twin. Amazingly though, its power output was pretty much the same as all the 2-strokes. It produced 36 horsepower at, wait for it, 10,500 RPM. A well-tuned one could apparently reach 100 miles per hour, and it would cover the quarter mile in 15.5 seconds. But it would need every one of those revs to get there. At the time, some questioned if its engine was built to handle such an extreme amount of revolutions. The answer was yes, and the CB350 proved to be a very reliable motorcycle, and indeed, it became one of Honda's most successful models that they have ever manufactured. Its 5-speed gearbox, with the same now standard shift pattern, had excellent gear ratios designed for every riding situation. The CB350 was one of the best looking bikes of the era, and its styling marked a new direction for Honda at the time. The bike also featured an electric starter, the only bike on this list to have one. So in summary, the quickest accelerating bike in this segment was Kawasaki's A7 Avenger, by a very small margin. The fastest in top speed was a Suzuki T350, again, not by much. The best handling, and I'm hoping some of you watching will have some input on this, I'm going to give it to the Suzuki T350, on the grounds of its racing performance against much larger machines. But I've never ridden one, so no doubt many of you would know much more than me in regard to their handling ability. The best choice for short distance touring, particularly 2-up, I would give it to the Kawasaki Avenger, mainly because of its large and more comfortable seat. The best looking bike, and obviously again this is very subjective, but in my opinion it would go to the Bridgestone 350 GTR. Cheers, and I hope you enjoyed this video as much as the last one. Thanks for watching.